I was literally shocked. I am still to my very core, recovering from what I witnessed yesterday, and we urgently need to talk about this. If you thought the whole Americans claiming they invented the computer thing was bad, you have no idea how deep the delusion actually goes. In the US, we would never ever admit that we are just riding the coattails of European history. We are taught from the moment we can walk that America is the main character of the universe. We are the innovators. We are the creators. We are the disruption. But here is the truth, the raw, unfiltered truth that makes American tourists literally malfunction when they hear it. So much of what we consider to be our fundamental, red, white, and blue birthright was actually dreamt up by some guy in a shed in England while we were still trying to figure out how to not burn down our own capital city. Let's start with the one that genuinely almost caused a diplomatic incident in a co-working space in Soho last week. The internet, or more specifically, the World Wide Web. I was sitting there trying to answer some emails, and there were these two American digital nomad guys sitting across from me. They had the whole uniform, the Patagonia vests, the sleek noise-cancelling headphones pulled halfway off, drinking something that looked like moss. One of them was pitching a startup idea, and he goes, we just have to channel that original Silicon Valley energy. America built the digital world from the ground up. We gave Europe the internet, and now they just want to regulate it. I literally had to bite the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. We gave Europe the internet? I looked over at the communal kitchen area where this painfully quiet British IT guy was untangling a mass of Ethernet cables. He stopped, he didn't drop the cables, he didn't raise his voice. He just looked at the American and said, in that devastatingly gentle British tone, well, actually, mate, while your military was figuring out how to connect a few computers in a basement, a British bloke named Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. He wrote the first web browser, designed HTML, and set up the first server. Oh, and he gave it away for free. But I'm sure your startup will be very innovative. Can I just say something very fast? I looked at the analytics, and 87% of you watching are not subscribed, which means there are a lot of you casually consuming my international confusion with no long-term commitment. So if you enjoy this channel, hit subscribe and make it official. The American guy blinked, his brain completely short-circuited. Wait, what? No, Al Gore, DARPA, he was stammering. And this is exactly where the psychological analysis gets absolutely fascinating. In America, we conflate the infrastructure with the actual human experience. Yes, the American Department of Defense funded ARPANET, which was the underlying network, but the World Wide Web, the thing you are actually using right now, the interface, the URLs, the hyperlinks, the very concept of navigating pages of information visually was invented by an English computer scientist in 1989 at CERN. But Americans cannot process this because it fundamentally violates our economic identity. We assume that because Google, Meta, and Apple monetize the web, we must have invented it. We mistake the billboard for the highway. Tim Berners-Lee could have patented the World Wide Web. He could have become the richest man in human history, but he didn't. He released the source code to the public domain because he believed information should be free. In the US, we would never do that. If an American had invented the World Wide Web in 1989, we would currently be paying a monthly subscription fee just to look at a search bar. We simply cannot fathom an invention that isn't tied to a corporate IPO, so we just mentally erase the British guy who gave us the digital universe out of pure scientific goodwill. And speaking of claiming things we have absolutely no right to, we need to pivot to a lifestyle obsession that defines the American dream: the lawn, the suburban yard. A few weekends ago, I was out in Surrey visiting a friend, and we went for a walk past this beautiful, sprawling local park. There was an American tourist family walking ahead of us. The dad, wearing white New Balance sneakers and wraparound sunglasses, is looking at the grass. He nods, puts his hands on his hips, and says to his wife, "It's well kept, I'll give them that." But nobody does a lawn like an American suburban dad. We basically invented the modern yard. Before us, they just had wild fields. I wanted to scream. I really did. The sheer audacity to stand on British soil, surrounded by centuries of horticultural history, and claim that the American subdivision invented the lawn. Here is the historical context that our textbooks conveniently leave out while we are busy worshipping at the altar of Home Depot. The manicured lawn is a British aristocratic invention. For centuries, wealthy British landowners kept massive, short-cut grass fields around their manors purely as a flex. It was a way of saying, I am so incredibly wealthy that I can own land and not use it to grow food, but back then you had to hire a small army of peasants with scythes to cut it by hand. Also, if the normal videos are not enough for you, I do have a membership below where things get a little more unfiltered, a little more behind the scenes, and a little more interesting. Now, let's back to our topic. So, how did it become the modern, accessible lawn? In 1830, a British engineer from Gloucestershire named Edwin Budding was working in a textile mill. He noticed a machine that used a cutting cylinder to trim the irregular nap off the surface of woolen cloth. He looked at that machine and had a deeply profound thought. What if we rolled this over grass? He invented the first mechanical lawnmower. He patented it. It had a cutting cylinder, a rear roller, and a push handle. It is the exact structural grandfather of the very machine that every American dad proudly pushes around his quarter-acre kingdom in Ohio. When you tell an American this, they get genuinely defensive. Why? Because the lawnmower and the manicured yard are the physical manifestations of the American dream. We associate the lawn with post-war Levittown, the 1950s economic boom, the white picket fence, and our desperate need for property line control. We turned a British machine designed to democratize aristocratic aesthetics into a competitive, hyper-aggressive neighborhood sport governed by homeowner associations. We took Edwin Budding's brilliant little push mower, slapped a gas engine on it, made it incredibly loud, and convinced ourselves that maintaining Kentucky bluegrass in the middle of a desert in Arizona is an American constitutional right. We didn't invent the lawn, we just weaponized it. But the American instinct to claim ownership doesn't stop at the property line. It goes straight into the foundation of modern society. Let's talk about the electric grid, the absolute myth of American electricity. I was at the Science Museum in South Kensington a while back, which, by the way, if you haven't been, is a masterclass in making Americans realize they don't know anything. I was walking through the Energy Hall, and there was an American university student wearing a vintage-style Tesla Motors t-shirt. He's talking loudly to his friend, gesturing at all the antique machinery, and he says, it's crazy that the US basically electrified the world, like Edison, Tesla, Westinghouse. We built the modern grid. Europe was basically reading by candlelight until we showed them how to harness power. I stopped dead in my tracks. A museum guide, a lovely older woman with silver hair and a cardigan, was standing nearby. She didn't roll her eyes, she didn't sigh, she just deployed that weaponized British politeness. She stepped forward and said, "What a passionate interest you have in Thomas Edison. He was a very clever businessman, but of course he wouldn't have had anything to sell without Michael Faraday. We have his original 1821 experiment right over here. The world's first electric motor. Oh, and the first electrical generator from 1831, invented right down the road at the Royal Institution. Please, take your time looking around." The American student looked like his entire reality had just collapsed. He looked at the machine, then at his Tesla shirt, and then back at the machine. It is the exact same pattern. In America, we are fundamentally incapable of separating the science of an invention from the business of an invention. We worship Thomas Edison in our schools, not because he was the greatest scientific mind, but because he was a ruthless, brilliant CEO. We are taught that Edison invented the light bulb, and therefore America invented electricity. But legally, structurally, scientifically, the entire foundation of electromagnetism is British. Michael Faraday was a self-educated genius from a poor family who started out as a bookbinder's apprentice. He essentially figured out that if you pass an electric current through a wire suspended in a magnetic field, it creates continuous mechanical motion. He created the electric motor. 10 years later, he invented the electromagnetic generator, the continuous production of electric current. He literally discovered the principles of electromagnetic induction. Without Michael Faraday, there is no Thomas Edison. There is no Nikola Tesla. There is no Hoover Dam, no power grid, no modern civilization. Faraday built the engine. The Americans just put a patent on the light switch. But because we value the commercialization over the genesis, we retroactively claim the entire timeline of human illumination. And this brings me to a topic that genuinely makes my blood boil, and it happens every single time an American starts talking about healthcare and medicine abroad. The savior complex of American farmer. I was standing in line at a Boots pharmacy here in London last winter. Typical miserable rainy day. The line is moving slowly. There's an American expat in front of me complaining loudly to whoever was on his phone about the NHS. He's whining about the wait times, and then he drops this absolute bombshell. He says, these people just don't get efficiency. I mean, American pharmaceutical companies practically invented modern medicine. We fund all the research, we create the vaccines, we save the world from diseases, and they just reap the benefits. I swear to you, my soul left my body. I was preparing to verbally absolutely destroy this man, but the pharmacist beat me to it. The pharmacist, a very calm British guy behind the counter, hands the American his prescription, looks him dead in the eye and says, "There you go, sir." And just as a quick historical note while you're visiting, modern immunology and the very concept of the vaccine were invented by an English country doctor named Edward Jenner in 1796. Hull saved roughly 50 million lives a year. We didn't patent it though, we just thought it was the decent thing to do. Have a lovely afternoon. The American grabbed his bag and literally scurried out the door. We need to talk about Edward Jenner because American schools absolutely gloss over him to focus on Jonas Salk and the polio vaccine. We are conditioned to view ourselves as the medical saviors of the 20th and 21st centuries. We look at our massive multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry, we look at the sheer volume of drugs we pump out, and we assume that America birthed the concept of saving humanity from viral eradication. But here is the deeply sobering reality. In the late 1700s, smallpox was the deadliest disease on the planet. It was a nightmare. It killed hundreds of thousands of people every year. Edward Jenner, operating out of a small rural practice in Berkeley, Gloucestershire, noticed something deeply fascinating. He noticed that milkmaids, the women who milked the cows, never caught smallpox. They did, however, catch cowpox, a very mild disease. Jenner hypothesized that the cowpox was somehow protecting them. So in 1796, he took material from a cowpox blister and inoculated an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps. He then later exposed the boy to smallpox. The boy didn't get sick. Jenner had just invented the vaccine. In fact, the word vaccine comes from vacca, the Latin word for cow. It is the single most important medical breakthrough in human history. It led to the complete eradication of smallpox globally. But Americans don't want to talk about Edward Jenner. Why? Because Jenner's story isn't a story of massive corporate funding, military-grade laboratories, or pharmaceutical lobbying. It's the story of a highly observant British doctor who just wanted people to stop dying and freely shared his findings with the world. In the US, our medical identity is so tied up in profit margins, insurance premiums, and billion-dollar R&D narratives that we simply cannot compute a world-changing medical miracle that didn't come with an invoice. We assume that because we have the most expensive healthcare in the world, we must have invented healthcare. It is a staggering level of arrogance born entirely out of geographic and systemic isolation. But if you want to see the absolute pinnacle of this arrogance, the absolute top-tier American delusion, we have to talk about aviation, the jet engine, the sky. I was in a lounge at Heathrow Airport a few months ago, waiting for a flight back to the States for the holidays. There was an older American guy sitting near me, wearing a bomber jacket covered in American flag patches. He was talking to a younger British guy, clearly trying to school him on engineering. The American says, you know, the thing about America is we own the skies. From the Wright brothers to Boeing to the fighter jets we use to protect you guys, America gave the world modern aviation. We made the world small. I took a deep breath. The British guy, who looked like he was maybe an aerospace engineer or a pilot himself, gently put down his coffee. He smiled that polite, deadly British smile. The velvet slap was loading. He said, "I completely agree, sir. The Wright brothers were brilliant. But when it comes to modern aviation, the jet age, well, you actually have a 21-year-old British cadet to thank for that." Sir Frank Whittle invented and patented the turbojet engine in 1930. He was flying the first British jet aircraft while the Americans were still strictly using propellers. But we do love your Boeing planes. They're very large. The American in the bomber jacket went completely silent. He pulled out his phone and started aggressively typing, desperately trying to find an American to credit for the jet engine, but he couldn't, because the reality is undeniable. Frank Whittle was an absolute prodigy. In 1928, while at the Royal Air Force College Cranwell, he wrote a thesis arguing that planes would need to fly at high altitudes and high speeds to be efficient, and that propeller engines simply could not do it. He proposed using a gas turbine to produce a propelling jet. The British Air Ministry initially thought it was impractical, but Whittle patented the design in 1930 anyway. By 1937, he had a working prototype on the test stand. By 1941, the Gloucester E.28/39, powered by his engine, was flying. Why does this completely shatter the American psyche? Because our entire post-WW2 identity is built on air supremacy. We are taught that Kitty Hawk was the beginning, and then America just dominated the timeline forever. We make movies like Top Gun, we obsess over our Air Force, we tie our national masculine identity to the roaring sound of a jet engine breaking the sound barrier. To admit that the fundamental technology that makes an F-16 fly, the engine that powers every single commercial airliner crossing the Atlantic, was drawn up by a British guy in his early 20s in Lincolnshire, feels to an American like losing a war. We desperately want to believe that the jet engine was born in a top-secret American military bunker, not in a British university notebook. This happens over and over again, and the pattern is flawless. America declares ownership based on scale, volume, and branding. A British person quietly, effortlessly dismantles that ownership with a specific date, a specific name, and an encyclopedic knowledge of their own local history. And then the American retreats into the ultimate defense mechanism. Well, we scaled it, we made it an industry, and that right there is the crux of the American mindset. We completely conflate commercializing something with inventing it. We think that because we put a sleek casing on a piece of technology, sold it at a mall, or built a massive corporation around it, we are the gods of its creation. To an American, invention equals identity. To admit something was British first feels like surrendering pride. When Americans travel abroad and encounter these historical truths, it triggers a massive identity crisis. It's not just about realizing you got a fact wrong about a machine, a medical procedure, or a piece of software. It's about realizing that your country is the loud, wealthy, incredibly confident teenager in the geopolitical family. We have done amazing things, we have built incredible industries, but we lack the deep, bone-weary wisdom of the grandparents. The UK has been sitting here for thousands of years, quietly building the foundations of the modern world. They were doing the math, writing the code, mapping the electrical grid, curing the diseases, and literally inventing the engines of global travel, while we were still trying to figure out how to lay train tracks across our own continent. The British way of correcting Americans is truly an art form. Every British correction feels like a slap made of velvet. They don't shout, they don't humiliate you. They just quietly present you with a plaque, a date, and a gentle smile, and they let your own realization do the heavy lifting. In America, correction feels like an attack on your freedom. In Britain, it feels like weather. You just have to stand there and endure it until you are completely soaked in facts, and that is what I've learned after 2 years of living here. The American instinct to claim everything isn't born out of maliciousness, it's born out of geographic and cultural isolation. We are so geographically massive, so culturally dominant in our own media, that we rarely have to look outside our own windows to see how the house was actually built. We assume that if something is good, if something is important, if something shapes the modern world, it must have come from us. We don't inherit culture, we acquire it like a corporate merger, and then we immediately rebrand it as our own original idea. But I have to tell you, there is a profound, life-altering beauty in having that illusion shattered, because once you get over the initial sting of being wrong, once you stop trying to explain British inventions back to the British, you finally get to actually appreciate the world for what it is. You realize that you don't have to be the inventor of everything to enjoy it. You can just be a guest. You can walk into a pub that was standing before your country had a name, connect to the World Wide Web on your phone, step out onto a perfectly manicured lawn, and look up at a jet tearing across the sky, knowing that none of it belongs to you, but all of it is incredible. So the next time you hear an American confidently explaining how we revolutionized the world from scratch, just remember it's not arrogance, it's a curriculum problem. Our textbooks weren't exactly lying, they were just incredibly aggressively incomplete. If you ever come to the UK, bring your optimism, bring your energy, bring your loud American confidence, but leave the alternative facts at the airport, because I promise you, with absolutely everything in my soul, there is a British person sitting in a pub right now, sipping a pint, who knows exactly what year you are wrong about, and they are just waiting for the perfect, politely devastating moment to tell you. Cheers, y'all.